Thank you very much, Henry, for sharing with us that very important project and idea about this possible reform to the Foreign Sovereignty Immunity Act. Well, we would like to welcome now the Honorable Representative Eliot Engel with the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the U.S. House of Representatives. He's going to do the closing remarks for today. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be here. The young lady told me to watch the wires. I always talk about, in 25 years in the Congress, I've never tripped over wires yet. I'm always waiting for the first time to happen. Very good to be here. Very good to see all of you. I know many of you, and those that I don't know, I'm happy to get to know. As you know, I'm the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Before I became ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I was both chairman and ranking member of the Subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere. Many of us worked very closely together on many things involving the Western Hemisphere, which is my true love. And Chairman Royce and I have talked about making sure that the Western Hemisphere is very, very prominent. I think it's very important. When President Obama spoke before the United Nations recently, to my knowledge, he didn't mention the Western Hemisphere. When President Bush did a lot of things around the world, I always felt the Western Hemisphere was sort of playing second fiddle. I don't know what happens with all administrations, Democratic and Republican, but somehow or other we neglect those that are closest to us. I think it's a big shame and a mistake, although I understand we have pressing business in the Middle East and elsewhere, but I think where we are home in the Western Hemisphere, we ought to realize that there is a tremendous power if we would all work together, and the United States has to continue to play a leading role. So in my capacity as when I was chairman of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee for 4 years, I traveled extensively in the Americas, became a student in the region, loved all of it, loved the travel, loved the people, loved the presence of the United States. I learned very quickly that small gestures by the United States and things that we do can go a long, long way. People are waiting to hear what we're doing, and our engagement is very important. Among the other lessons I learned and I internalized was that it's very difficult and dangerous to make generalizations across the very diverse countries of our neighborhood in the Western Hemisphere. The working thesis of this conference effectively is that in some countries of the Americas, the instrumentalities of governance are abused. And of course, that's very true, specifically that the judicial process has been used to settle political scores. I think there is little doubt that that's true, and it's also true that this abuse is not confined to governments of the right or the left. I think it's been used, unfortunately, by both. What these abuses have in common, I think, is that they occur in a context in which one branch of government, usually the executive branch, holds vastly more power than the others. Further to this, and here I begin to enter into some generalizations, that judicial branches are vastly weaker in Latin America. In the U.S., we are happy, we revere in the fact that our system is made up of 3 co-equal branches of government, as well as the promise of the checks and balances that these provide. But that is not to say that our system is either easy, or that maintaining and strengthening these democratic structures is not frustrating and difficult. Look what's going on in Washington today with the budget crisis. It frustrates us all. But it's very interesting and important to remember that as frustrated as we are, who's the one who said democracy is the worst form of government, except when you look at all the other forms? And that's a little bit about what we are suffering with today, but I think we have to put it all in context. So it's precisely in the context we face today of raw political brinksmanship that I've never seen before in Washington that we take comfort in those checks and balances that we have. By and large, the countries of the Americas are young democracies, by and large, not all, unfortunately, in different stages of consolidating their democratic structures and processes, At any given moment in our region, it is possible to point to significant conflicts that are, at the end of the day, failures of mediation by the institutions of government charged with resolving them. To take just a handful of recent examples, in Haiti, congressional elections are 2 years behind schedule in a standoff controlled almost exclusively by the president. In Ecuador, a withering campaign of attacks by President Correa against media outlets critical of him seems to have no end, and he seems to have no shame. In Honduras, after the 2009 replacement of the president, the de facto Micheletti government dealt with the judiciary that sought to put limits on his power by simply throwing judges in jail with impunity. Many of these cases are still unresolved today, and to say nothing of the Cuban government, which is such an undemocratic outlier here that I don't know where to begin to discuss that case. What almost all these cases have in common is that a domestic constitutional countervailing force is unavailable. This places much of the onus to push back on outside forces and institutions. The United States has traditionally played this role, but I believe it's fair to say that our ability to do so and to keep doing that is becoming more and more constrained. Even if we are extremely generous in accounting for political differences, it's unfortunate that the U.S. finds it so difficult to galvanize allies in the region to condemn some of the more egregious rule of law or human rights abuses by governments, say, in Ecuador and Venezuela. One significant check is the Inter-American human rights system at the OAS. If there is a hero in this film, it is the Inter-American Commission and the Inter-American Court, which together make up this system. In fact, as a good barometer of the most egregious violators of any given moment in the Americas, look no further than the countries aiming scornful attacks on the system. Not coincidentally, Venezuela has recently announced its intention to leave the jurisdiction of the Human Rights Court. The paradox is that the human rights system is busier now than at any time in its history. Its caseload today surpasses even the darkest years of the region's military dictatorships. For that reason, it's disturbing to me that some of my colleagues have been constantly and vocally critical of the Inter-American human rights system. 2 years ago, I sat through a sad spectacle as my committee voted to defund the OAS and its human rights arms. One member went so far as to call the OAS an enemy of freedom. The fact that he was in perfect agreement in that assessment with Hugo Chavez did not temper his words in the slightest. Thankfully, that amendment did not become law, but I believe the feelings it left in the strongly democratic parts of our region are still being felt today. That said, we in the Congress may be in a different place today. Last week, the President signed the OAS Revitalization and Reform Act of 2013. This effort was a model of bipartisan action in the best sense of the word. Senator Menendez introduced the bill in the Senate, where it passed with bipartisan support. When it reached the House, I worked closely with Chairman Royce to introduce important changes. The bill passed the House overwhelmingly, and the Senate then passed the amended bill unchanged. The fact that this occurred in such an incredibly polarized Congress shows that even now we are capable of working together if we want to. And let me say as a side of that, that I'm very, very proud of the work that I've done with Chairman Royce. He is the chairman, me as the ranking member during this past year of 2013. I think that the Foreign Affairs Committee in our House is the most bipartisan committee in the entire House. Our members work together. They treat each other with respect. Yes, there are differences from time to time in policy, but we try to form a consensus as best we can, and I really wish the rest of the Congress would follow our lead. The single most important change I made to that law, the OAS Revitalization and Reform Act of 2013, is the notion that the regular fund fee structure at the OAS suffers from significant distortions that have had negative effects on the organization's effectiveness and on the United States. This is not a new problem, but I believe it's time to take the bull by the horns. What each country pays in assessed fees, the price of membership, if you will, differs so wildly at the OAS that the highest payer, the United States, is constantly criticized for wielding lopsided power. So we pay all this money and then we get criticized for it. So I would go so far as to say that the symbolism of being so disproportionately the largest contributor actually clashes with the ethos of an organization that prizes consensus and working together to solve our multilateral problems. So the law now asks the State Department, which is what I put in, this was my amendment, to find a pathway to eventually ensure that no OAS member state pays more than 50% of the assessed fee. Let me be clear, our intention here is not only to simply pay less money, although that's one of the factors, but our intention really is to open up a conversation with our partners at the OAS to create a more egalitarian fee structure that better represents a modern forum to discuss our problems together, because they can't have it both ways. They can't take our money and then complain about it at the same time. Still, neither the OAS nor any outside force is going to solve the underlying problem of the relative weakness of judicial systems in the region, which are all too easily exploited for political ends. The judiciary, as a co-equal branch of government, perhaps the critical component to safeguard the rule of law, is quite simply not a reality in much of the Americas, and we have to, in my opinion, help to make it more of a reality in the future. If we were to reduce much of this debate to a single task at hand for the region, I would say it would be to strengthen the rule of law and respect for the rule of law. And although forces outside any given country can and do help to foster this, it must obviously come from within. And I would go a step further. It is not a stretch to state that the political class of many nations of the Americas has been slow to recognize the intrinsic value of a strong, independent judiciary that can stand up to other branches of government. Until that changes, consolidation of democratic governance in the hemisphere will not take the needed qualitative leap forward. I look forward to working with you on many of these issues, and thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much to Representative Engel, to the panelists, to all of you. We share all of this interest on judicial independence. But we are a little over time, so what would, in relation to questions, what I would suggest is maybe the panelists can stay, can be around for 5 or 10 minutes so that people can approach you and make directly some questions, okay? And thank you very much. This comes to an end of a very interesting day, and thank you very much for coming.